Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go ahead and get this meeting started with a roll call vote. I am here, Ms. Allen, Mr. Kitson,
Present.
Ms. Shippert,
Yes.
Mr. Bally,
Present.
Mr. Wilson. Approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there any changes or corrections? Otherwise, they will stand as read. Visitors, everybody's on the agenda, or they can chime in as they see fit. We have the pipeline in front of us in print copy, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to review this over the weekend. I open it up for discussion. Mr. Kitson, you said you've got at least one.
In our solar one.
Oh,
which I know
start
we're
with the
not-
pipeline.
I know.
Okay,
But in our solar one, we reference having, for the insurance, having somebody, in other words, look at our insurance rather than having limitations on it. And that is by somebody's note. They reviewed it.
okay.
I wondered if we shouldn't look at that same thing for pipeline and for, rather than put limitations on it. And I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I made notes, but I did not. We reference it in the solar one. Okay, going to an insurance carrier and asking their opinion of what we put in.
Okay,
That's really the only thing I had in the pipeline on this. That's a question of concern.
But this doesn't preclude us from doing that anyhow.
Well, I think we need it in our ordinance, what we're gonna do, and not come up with a,
yeah,
after the fact, oh, this is what we're gonna do.
yep.
Forward. And when Alice gets a chance and gets up, I would ask him to just reference it. Because I didn't write it down, because I thought we'd use them all on my mistake. Nope. But just the one from solar on insurance, and ask him to use the same thing. Assuming we adapt that thought process, we'd do the same thing for.
I would like these to be as similar as possible.
Yes. That's why I thought, Marilyn, we'll make all three of them the same. As far as insurance, I see no reason not to.
Agreed.
And that has been the challenge all along, is making them as similar.
Yeah.
The wording
We
was
need
put in,
Alice here.
the wording was put in there as a note, made it seem pretty good. You guys remember looking
I
at it?
don't remember it, but I didn't,
Well, there's a lot here to go over on all
Yeah.
three of these.
Yeah, solar was last, but it, right. That was a little different. Solar was our one we had most complete. Yeah.
Well-
Was it a new,
Wind was.
or wind, I'm sorry. Yeah,
well, solar's been revised
Several times, which
quite a few times, which
was
is
the
good,
plan, it's gonna be a living document.
Yeah. but each time we need to be improving, not texting.
And then my recommendation is that before we ever submit these to the board, once we finalize them, that we give Charlie the chance to review them all for us.
Definitely.
Prior to submitting. to the board.
No, you're fine. I'm trying to.
due to
Accept that.
it.
Open with books.
Airdrop of books.
Open with books, okay.
I didn't even bring it along since it didn't have any of the stuff on it.
There you go. There's your wind ordinance. Yeah.
Oh, you're getting it on there now, it's proving me wrong.
I just airdropped it to everybody.
Okay, and I,
Copied it and airdropped it, so.
Okay.
But that would have been back the last page of everything, right?
I don't think it was that far back. Never, Chris,
Insurance.
yeah,
Insurance wasn't last, demolition
I didn't reference it as a,
line item.
Looks like.
Thank you for sharing, Dave.
18.
okay.
There you go.
Where are we at? Page 18, but we're not showing the notes that were.
Did you guys have a chance to go through the solar and wind? Do you have any changes or corrections that you see? Okay.
The setback, I think needs to be better defined. Which ordinance? Where? Yet it says 400 feet from the nearest foundation,
From the foundation of the residence, correct.
but that would be more than a square of 800 feet.
Are you in the solar?
Well, she's on the solar. Yep. So it's 400 feet from any direction of the foundation.
But that would, but the 800-foot square is smaller than that.
How so?
Because the nearest foundation, the 400 feet is measured 800-foot square. You've got 400 feet from the center of the house. And it also says 400 feet from the nearest foundation,
Of the primary residence, correct.
but that doesn't correspond with each other.
So you're saying that it doesn't take into account the square footage of the house?
Right.
Gotcha.
One of them says from the center, and one of them says from the foundation.
In fact, I'd like to see that changed to 500 feet.
You don't.
You wanted to see 500 feet from the residence? And I know we discussed that at length before we did the last meeting. You remember that, Mr. Kitson?
Yes. Yeah.
That was a very much a sticking point.
That was discussed even more, further back,
Yeah, that's.
early
ongoing.
discussions, yeah, it's been ongoing
Correct.
all along. Finally got to the 400 is
Because at one point they were down to 200 feet.
The non-participating owners are not being recognized. Hopefully it's not participating.
And that's the balancing act that we have to look at is landowner rights of what the person who owns the ground, as well as the non-participating. It's a balancing act of what you can do. That's why you see the vegetative buffer and the payment that's in there is the reason for a lot of that.
Setback, we're setting back and treating it. Platted subdivision. So originally, the setbacks were quite small. I think it was 15-foot to panel.
Correct.
Effective setback 200 from the property line of not just platted subdivisions, but the property line of any residential parcel that's 5 acres and less. And then for the properties that are above 5 acres, we would set back from the foundation. 500 feet in that context is probably about what we were committing to even in that circumstance. So it would be overly burdensome from what we can tell to any project to set back 500 feet from the foundation
In which ordinance?
versus water.
So,
Okay,
sorry.
which one?
On the insurance.
Okay. Let's finish pipeline and then we'll come back. Okay, sound good? So, Tom's only concern with the pipeline is in regards to insurance, correct, Tom?
Yes, if we use solar just for this definition, okay? On page 18, the comment is, in my opinion, some of these insurance limits are inadequate, particularly with respect to the per occurrence bodily injury limit and the pollution liability limit. It would be best to consult with the county's insurance person on this and specifically inquire about feasibility requiring commercial umbrella coverage to more fully cover these risks, as well as other enumerated risks.
Is this on the solar ordinance? That's pipeline? Okay,
It's on solar, yes.
that is, okay.
Yes.
That comment originated from our first review back at beginning of 2021.
Okay.
And we have consulted with our county insurance provider as to whether we should accept an insurance or an umbrella policy as opposed to a regular policy. So we have followed up on that.
That's included in this part then, Alex?
Yes,
So all three of them match?
they should.
Okay.
That's the intent.
That's all I want to look at, is we made all three of them the same and that we were,
The pipeline might have a lower amount required, but the language essentially is the same.
that answers that question. Thank you.
And why would the pipeline have a lower amount? Why not be consistent all the way across the board?
We can.
I mean, I'd rather be better protected than
Yeah, I would, yeah.
Nope, they do say all exactly the same. Like they are literally verbatim, the exact same,
Okay,
and including the dollar amounts.
okay. That's
All
fine.
three of them are,
all right.
so,
Thank you for
Fine.
verifying all that.
nope, that's fine. Maintenance and liability, it's all 5 million. Yep, all good. Any other questions or discussion on pipeline? I think that one we're to a point where I'm very, very comfortable moving that one forward. If you guys are.
Yep. That was the only question I had.
Ms. Shippert, do you have any more discussion?
I think I'm good. There's one thing I want to check with, but
Mr. Bally, while she's looking?
The only thing I seen on the solar was.
Well, let's just do pipeline. We'll do
Oh, pipeline,
solar.
okay, pipeline, no, I didn't see anything. Everything's good.
So,
I'll entertain a motion to move this to properties.
Prior to you doing that, in the copy I gave you, it provides a bunch of comments that I have. I was hoping that the board would allow me to continue to work with Stephanie to hammer out some of these comments that I have. Most of them are just clarification and cleanup, nothing substantial.
So all of these, there is some clarification, some definition and cleanup that will be completed before the county board meeting and have an official, but I think at this point, to keep on the timeline, I'd like to move this one on to properties.
Second that.
but-
Promotion,
What?
that, whatever.
Mr. Bally makes the motion to move this to properties.
I'll second.
Ms. Shippert, any further discussion? Mr. Kitson?
okay, are we gonna have a chance when this is, before this goes to the board, we want to make sure this goes to Charlie. He gets a chance to look it over. And has
Absolutely.
time to do it, not rush.
Yeah.
All three copies were provided to Charlie last week when they went out to all the board members.
Well, I just spoke to him this morning and he'd like the opportunity to look it over when it's complete
Okay,
before it goes to the board, so you can give us a good legal opinion on it.
okay.
Perfect. Yes, we will definitely make sure that happens. All those in favor of sending this to properties and indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? You guys have it. Okay, we'll move on to solar. let's- Okay. Mr. Kitson, you've got some notes there that you would like to just,
Well, just some clarifications, I guess.
okay?
We talk about fencing. And if it's 6-foot fence, it does not require woven, is that correct?
So this all goes back to electrical code. If it's 7 foot or above, it does not require barbed wire. If it's 7 foot or below, it requires barbed wire. I believe we said it has to be an 8-foot woven wire fence to make sure it doesn't require barbed wire around the entire property. That was the reason for the fencing from the,
Wasn't that just
Okay,
certain
that's-
adjacent landowners, if I read?
That's at request, that's not.
A request, right, if adjacent.
correct.
Right.
So all that goes back to fencing requirements based off of National Electric Code.
Okay, and another, in the application requirements, shall provide fire protection plan. I'm wondering with some of the more recent issues we've had with things getting held up by fire department acceptance of plans, if we should ask them to have an approved fire plan. Because in some of these, it could even involve 2 or 3 different fire departments. But I know there's been some issues with having a fire plan, and having talked to the fire chief. He feels we can move faster if he's involved earlier in the process to approve a plan rather than coming back and possibly stopping construction to say, wait, this doesn't match what we're doing.
Can you guys comment on fire plans and fire protection how do you guys address that with local fire departments?
Microphone.
Can you come up to the mic? Courtney probably wants to hear you. If she's got to defend you in court, she wants to hear what you're saying.
Morning, everybody. Scott Raymer with Hexagon Energy, working on the Stewart Creek project. With regards to fire plans, what we've historically done is submitted copies to the fire chiefs and asked for comment. And usually what the comment has been is that just make sure that a Knox box and emergency access is included on the gate, which I see your proposed bylaw has already included. I've also heard of groups doing various training sessions on how any sort of fire management mitigation would be handled with this. And we're very interested in doing a workshop, say with if various fire departments wanted to have a workshop on this, that would be fine. But historically, the issues run into is just making sure that access is provided through the Knox box on the gates.
Back to the materials, the manufacturer specs that apply generally have some mention of the fire safety protections that we have to go through, but we can work with manufacturers specifically on these products to ensure our plan adequately addresses primary point of concern or the more, I guess, materials that we have to pay attention to would just be inverters for any power storage components, solar panels themselves, fire or emergency concerns associated with them. So that's really what we focus on in our previous fire protection plan. But as Scott mentioned, for Stewart Creek specifically, we worked with Galen Cardell, Stewart fire districts to get that plan approved to ensure everything is going to be documented properly, easily accessible for them, and also contain all proper plans in place that they would see from us, not just providing access, but also emergency materials on site when and if.
So-
What kind of,
Go ahead.
what kind of flammable materials might there be within the solar panels? obviously the wiring, I think we've got electrical, can always present a fire situation. You know, if it's a dry season, the ground cover, it might be very brown and get fire if there were a. I guess I'm looking at what is the likelihood.
It's a good question. These things have been built all over and they're planted with grasses underneath across the whole area. As you point out, there's wires, there's electricity. When things are mismanaged, if they are mismanaged, there can be, I suppose in some cases, a risk of fire, which is part of why these arrays are segmented, broken off separately. Fire departments have access to everything, plus these things are real-time monitored because, you know, if they're not producing power, nobody's able to get to it. Or if they're not producing power, they're not producing energy and thus revenue. So people are constantly making sure that they're operating correctly and properly. And access roads are made sure, you know, something we've had to make sure across all of our sites in the country is that access roads have appropriate turnaround areas for fire equipment and fire construction. The panels are not flammable, if you will. They're silicon, they're glass, they're metal, copper wiring. There's nothing flammable in them. The only thing is the electrical area. And so if you were to have a fire, the most likely spot that would occur would be at the inverter, which is on a concrete pad and is, you know, going to be well maintained and have things mowed down around it. It's going to be near an access road. So that's where it would be located.
I think that typically our rural fire departments also handle the ambulance service. And they're looking at that also. But I think what I heard you say is you've already talked to that fire department, to have a plan that works.
It wasn't a requirement of the ordinance, but leading up to Stewart Creek and what we do generally with our projects is reach out to every stakeholder that's local. So we wanted to reach out to the schools, the fire department, any taxation body, local villages as well, just to make sure that if they had any questions about the project, they would be able to ask those. We can make modifications before going in front of the board. The fire and landscaping plans were two of those documents that we had some pretty good impact and changes made from speaking with local consultants. Landscaping wise, we changed our entire seeding plan. Local experts had before. It's something that you can pull generically from Google to say what's a native grass seed mix, but we really don't know as much as what someone locally has. So adding those kind of requirements to push away from a generic piece of information that you can find on Google to something more specific to the county is really helpful. And the same certainly goes for the fire protection plan, where for us, we wanted to make sure that we didn't just have a generic plan that speaks generally to what environmental or what emergency concerns exist for any project around the country. There could be specific pieces of information that local fire departments and local emergency services have for these projects. We wanted to be able to address this in a plan ahead of time. So working with Galen at the Stewart Fire District was a good step for us to make sure that we have addressed everything that he would potentially have concern for these facilities ahead of any county permit. So similar to having the initial discussion of reaching out to a road commissioner for road use agreements, or at least the road use agreement to start the conversation with the county road commissioner. Something similar being done with fire districts is by no means problematic for this project. It just creates a more comprehensive and well put together application before going to zoning and before going to the county. But definitely each district could have specific concerns or specific questions for plans. Each developer has a different fire protection plan. So having those questions being asked by the local experts and having changes being made is probably something that would be, it's great to have it done before the actual petition is submitted, but having that input brought as a condition of approval by zoning from those local experts similarly would not be problematic if there are items of immediate and specific concern that those districts bring up.
So for us to change that from having a fire protection plan provided to having it approved, really is what you've already done. So that would be, I don't, I think Dee would agree that would, Alice, I don't know, it would eliminate some problems if the plan was approved by fire departments prior to when we do the application, rather than just having a plan that's submitted.
And that will be up to you guys if you want to require an approved plan. We have not received any pushback from the fire districts to date for wind or solar. I do know that going forward with battery energy storage, there are some concerns that we will be addressing within the ordinance that we have heard from the fire districts.
I'd just like to see us move that into have an approved plan.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So we've got a lot of volunteer fire departments with volunteer fire chiefs.
Exactly where I was going.
Who, if I'm going to pick on Harmon, for example, like we're not even a fire protection district. We're a dues subscription. Am I going to put that on the fire chief to say, hey, does he have the qualified and necessary training to approve said project if it's through Harmon Township? And I get it if we've got Dixon rural, that's a whole different ball of wax. But we start talking about some of these rural communities that it's, hey, I've been on the fire department for 20 years. Now I'm the fire chief. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have the training to put together an approved fire plan. But I think that they need to be in conversation with them moving forward.
Well, if as it states now, we shall provide a fire protection plan. I'll put up a number and you can call the fire department. Is that an approved plan?
One comment I could provide here. Approved is in spirit, I completely agree with what you're saying. Approved is a hard word because does that mean a vote has been taken? Does it mean who approves? Maybe a way that we could work with it would be fire protection plan that has been reviewed and approved, keep coming back to that word, but that has been developed in collaboration with or approved by in comment with the local fire department. Something like that, that means they know what's going on and they've provided input to us.
My concern with it is we have buildings that have been built and near completion.
Yeah.
Fire department was never involved, sign off on the plan. They come out and go, well, wait a minute, this isn't appropriate.
Right.
And
So
everybody gets upset and they rain down on the fire department.
Right.
Where I think we involve,
Maybe we could say that has been developed in commentary and communication with the fire department and throw something like that so that everybody's already.
I mean, if in your example, if Harmon doesn't feel comfortable as a chief, they can pass on it and accept what there is. They have somebody else review it. I mean, otherwise we've done nothing to protect them.
or they want to go and be king all end all and say, hey, no, we're going to require a sprinkler system over the top of,
I
and
understand.
that's
No,
unacceptable either, right?
Right.
And so the example that you're using about the building is an occupied building. We're talking here about farm ground that's.
But you still have issues that I think they need to have the right to look at it and say,
Absolutely,
no, we
but
can't get our ambulance in that gate, or we can't, you know.
Because a skeezy developer could come in and say, our fire plan is that if there's a fire, you can get into the site, put it out, and that's
Right.
it. And we don't want something that's just like a hand wavy, yeah, you can put the fire out, great. We're happy to provide more detail, as Will said. We work in coordination with Galen. And so I think something that says that has been developed and reviewed by the local fire department. Maybe that's all that is needed, just,
Fire department just acknowledges receipt and review of the plan.
yeah, that would
There
be
you go.
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have gone the extra mile and done the right thing.
Right.
Don't want to see somebody, a developer come in, well, we got a plan, and
Right.
comes a battleground. and
Right.
We're the project.
I like the reviewed and review, what were the words you used? Received and reviewed by the fire department. I think that's acceptable to us.
In the case of Harmon.
Yeah.
Get it and.
Well, and if they want to go to Dixon and ask, that's great.
What do you guys think about this? We've got a sign on.
Yeah.
We reviewed it.
Yeah.
They all work together anyway.
Yeah, they do.
But that's very easy. So the applicant shall provide a fire protection plan received and reviewed by local fire department for the construction and operation of the facility.
Yeah.
That's very simple. That way,
Great for us.
we're all good with
Thank
that.
you, guys. I think it's important.
It's an
that
important
works.
question, so.
Got that, Alice?
Mhm.
I think that's Most of what I had questions about.
Mr. Valley, did you have?
Okay, to address the issue that you had on the centering of the, on page 2, dwelling exclusion zone, 800-foot by 800-foot square area centered on a non-participating primary dwelling, unless otherwise agreed to. The SES equipment and fences are excluded from this area. You know, so even the fencing is excluded. And then you go to page 5. And L. Anyhow, the equipment setbacks.
Is all defined there as well.
Yeah, so then you have a minimum of 400 foot from any foundation of an adjacent non-property dwelling. And then it goes on to explain the 800-foot square. So an 800-foot square from the center compared to 400 foot from the foundation are two different numbers.
So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be, I think that was clarification. It's 400 foot from the foundation. Oh, 400. But that wasn't the purpose of this committee. We had discussed that we want to keep it at 400. I think 400 is a fair and reasonable number. Initially, when we started this, we talked about 600 feet on, some people were on 600, some people were at 200. The 400 foot.
Common.
Yeah, or it was
Common
just,
denominator.
this has been a long-term process, and like you say, everything from 200 to 600 has been, I think somebody even wanted 800. But it
Yeah,
was-
8.
You know,
Yeah.
we've got 500 feet for inverters, transformers.
Right,
Why not be consistent? With 500.
well, just panels and so on, or you can put them on your house, that's,
The inverters is what made any sound. And then, but when you start talking 800 square foot or 800 foot square is 14 and a half acres.
right.
That
Oh, I
was
agree.
when we started doing the math, the backwards
Yeah.
math of the exclusion zone, you started realizing quick, fast, and in a hurry that we want to say we want to protect farm ground.
Addressing your
Now,
issue.
wait a minute, run that number past me.
800 times 800 is, hold on,
No, I think that makes sense.
800 times 800 is how many squares? 6,000, 640,000. There's 43,560 square
Well,
feet in an acre. That's
940 by 960 sitting right out here.
That's
20
14.69 acres in the exclusion zone. In the 800.
I guess I'm not understanding how to define that.
Square, 800-foot square.
800 foot square is 640 square feet, right? No, 600 and, 640, there's 43,560. That's 14 and a half acres in a
Exclusion zone.
in the exclusion zone. And if our whole purpose was protecting, to making the most productivity of the farm ground, we just,
When you start looking at it that way, that's what we said, yes, this is.
Yeah, that's where we went to the 400, because you put 500 in there and it's significantly farther.
yeah, so just 1,000.
But then playing devil's advocate here, I mean, as far as,
It's 20, almost 23 acres. Does that make sense? It's just such a large number of,
I guess that you. That 800 feet by 800 feet turns into that huge number. I guess.
it's 400 from the nearest foundation.
the 400 foot,
Eliminate that.
We use it as a definition. So it's 400 from the foundation of an
So
adjacent,
how does the 800 I mean, that's where I'm confused, how the 800 plays.
I agree, an 800 square foot, 800 square is a different who decides what's north, south, east, west on a square? But I understand where you're coming from, but that's fences and everything.
Correct.
Play devil's advocate on that. If I was the next adjacent landowner and somebody wanted to buy 5 acres and build a house on it, keep it 400 foot from my property line, because then you control my property. Does the adjacent landowner have that in the future?
We'll say that again.
If
So the
somebody had a
solar
5
project's
acre
already
or
there.
10 acre plot,
So the solar project's already there.
if, without the solar project, if I'm a farmer, adjacent landowner, and they got a 10 acre lot, they want to build a house on it, can I maintain that they stay 400 foot from my property line?
No,
No.
Right, so then they control 385 foot of my property by having a 4 foot, by having the 400.
correct.
So so 400 really controls somebody's property. And when get more becomes a really major,
It's an apples and oranges type thing.
yeah.
At the end of the day, still stand by it. Zoning takes away landowner rights. That's all we're doing.
It also protects some.
It also protects landowner rights.
Big bag.
So that's where 400 came from. If we want to clarify that, everywhere where it says the 800-foot exclusion zone, it should be a 400, the exclusion zone should be 400 feet from the primary foundation.
In our definition does say that an 800 foot by 800 foot square exclusion zone centered on the adjacent non-participating primary dwelling foundation. And it's going to be more than 800 by 800 square
Correct,
when we're dealing with a foundation.
correct.
So
So
Right.
it's, at the end of the day, this is the exclusion zone. We know that it's always going to be bigger than that because it goes to the foundation. So if you have just gonna use a round number, 100 by 100 house. You actually,
That house.
what's that?
But yeah.
Yeah.
so
But
that's
you're-
some.
But you're gonna get an extra 50 feet on top of that. So it's actually 850 foot exclusion zone, correct? It's the greater of the two, so it's 400 feet from the foundation. From the primary dwellings foundation, not a barn, not a chicken coop, not the primary.
Okay, but then where does your 800 fit in? That's where I'm lost.
I don't know how that ever came about.
So if you take it from a point, it's 400 one direction and 400 the other direction. So that's your 800 by 800 square. So while this isn't exactly dead on because we're doing it from a foundation, we can make a modification that it's 400 feet from any point on the primary dwellings foundation. If you think that'll make it clearer.
Is that what you guys want? You want 400 feet from any point on the foundation?
Well,
I want to know what you're talking about with this 800. That's where I'm getting lost.
Well, an 800 square with the point in the middle, rather than 400 from
It was,
the
I
foundation.
think it was generalization.
It was-
400 from the foundation, and we never considered the house. I believe.
Yeah, it was a generalization of saying 800.
Because we just battled Maryland from 200 to 500,
I
600.
get that, but 800 by 800 foot square. Square is what?
Where,
Do
again,
you see my concern here?
what's a square?
No,
You
it's
know.
not. It's always a square. A square is a
100
square.
in each
Yeah, but
direction.
it's longer.
That would be a total length of 800.
800. But then are we going,
800 in east, west, north, south.
yeah. So then we got our 8,
But if the property line's at a slight diagonal, now it's,
That was what it was because we didn't want it to be a circle. We wanted it to be a square.
Because it includes more acreage.
That's what it was. Because if you do 400 from here, 400 from the foundation, it's now a circle. it's 800 and a circle.
No, in a square.
This is like the house,
Yep.
and it's 400 feet from the foundation.
Correct.
So we measure it,
This corner will be circled, then square, or straight, then circle, straight. That would be
That's right. You end up
four
with
hundred from the
more.
top, but the square would actually be inside of that because it went from the center of the house.
Not all of it.
And really, we
Not
can
all,
remove
you're right. The
square.
corners would be bigger, but
We can remove square because, I mean, not all houses are square. If it was a triangle, it'd still be 400 feet from every side of the foundation. I think that's the point that we need to clarify.
The way that it's written, it keeps it farther away from the primary residence
in the corners.
in the corners, correct?
But who determines how the square lays?
Third-party engineer. Well, it's a square is a square. A square always has to.
Square can lay anyway.
Yeah, but
it's still
gonna be 400 by 400.
No, yeah, but now the points are 400 is 600.
No, because then you
Why
still have
500
the
and some?
400-foot from the foundation. And that's where the third-party engineer comes into play.
so we're 400 feet out this way from the foundation,
Mhm.
you know? We measure here, we're 400 feet.
But to the corners of the square is 560 foot, 560 plus foot. So at some point, it's 560 from the center of the house. In some places, it's 400 from the foundation. But who determines where the square lays for that 560 from the center?
Third-party engineer.
Third-party engineer.
Okay.
That's why he's being hired.
And once again, it doesn't matter where the square lays. If it lays here, here's, it's still got to be 400 from the foundation.
Still a square. The roundhouse is still a square.
So ultimately, if you want to just change it to 400 feet from the foundation and get rid of the square, that's the ultimate question, what this committee wants.
Mm-mm.
I'll sit here and do something.
You know, I,
You know,
800 by 800 split squares where I'm hung up. Said before, that's 14 acres.
Correct. Big area.
So like, that's inconsistent with the 400 feet. That's where,
It's kind of an inconsistency. It's-
So just, okay, so let's just change that to 400 feet from the foundation. The dwelling exclusion zone will be 400 feet from the edge of all foundations.
From any point on the, any
Yeah.
point on the foundation,
There you go.
all points
That
on the
excludes the
foundation.
exclusion zone and takes it to 400, but you're giving up. Now you've made a circle and you've given a less of a setback to,
Yes. Otherwise, they had 565 foot in the corners from the center of the house. As considered 400
feet.
foot from the foundation.
Right.
So that the exclusion zone would have square, where spots would be rounded. Where some parts of it would be squared with bump outs where it's foundation side.
Whiteboard. Whiteboard. Don't worry about it. You don't know.
I just,
No, I.
because
it's an
Dave,
odd
your
thing.
envision is this, right?
Yeah, there, that's exactly it.
okay, so your square is that,
The house is the center.
800 by 800
So that's,
with a 400 here. But then if you go from here, the 400 goes here.
This is 400 foot from the foundation. This is 800 foot.
And then the
Exclusion.
radius of this here comes across here.
it's no longer square. Is
Yeah,
Correct.
Right, the corners,
So,
but the diagonal here is 565 and 6.
You've given more protection to non-participating
That makes
residents
sense.
with the way it's written.
So this would be 400 here.
This is what the industry is okay. I'm okay with leaving it exactly how it is. It protects the non-participating more, and it's exactly what the industry wanted.
Yeah, either way is fine with us. Both, I mean, it basically sounds like, it provides protection both ways, so
That makes sense.
we can't build in either, but it's also very close, whatever the width of a house is gonna be is plus or minus 50 feet for a big
Right.
house, something like that. So, for us,
Oh.
the way I would read that is say, okay, just
This is
whatever's
400.
furthest, don't get within either one of those, draw that out and find out what the setback would be, and we'll just leave the whole area, because it's plus or minus at that point, it's not a particularly large area in
But
different.
these corners, 565 here.
I could see confusion though, and if somebody wanted to say whichever is greater, if you wanted to just add that language, whichever is the greater offset of the exclusion zone or up 400 feet from any boundary, that's also adds some clarity.
This guy said, well, I want this way, so.
What about saying a minimum of 800 by 800 square?
Yeah, that'll work. That's fine. That works.
I want to give as much protection to non-participating residents that still,
I'm for the protection. I just want to understand what we're saying.
yeah. So a minimum of 800-foot exclusion zone.
That works.
It should be taken from 400 feet from any point on the foundation,
Right.
a minimum of 800. by
Right.
800.
It ends up being two different circles. They're not one's radiused off, and one's a perfect square, which is outside of the radius. What I'm saying is, how do you decide where, oh, I want my house that way, that makes it so we're right here. Right,
And that's what-
somewhere it's 565 for the center, and some places it's 400. Who's determining that?
Which number? Third-party engineer.
Yeah. There's parts where it's 565
Correct.
and parts where it's 400 from the foundation. So
So it shows how the lands overlap. So all of that, will go solar in there. There's still a 50 setback here.
I'm just saying, we can find this much argument out. Somebody else is good at it.
So what else did you have other than,
Okay, that makes more. Seeing it, maybe.
I'd really like to change, so I mean, this is kind of like.
so the inverters, there's a lot of fire regulation that has to go with the inverters. That's the part that has the noise, absolutely. That's where we have the vegetative buffers. And theoretically, they're going to position those based off of all those facts as far away from residences as they possibly can as it is. So I know I'm going to speak in terms to the Aldina Solar Project. They can speak to their project, but the Aldina Solar Project was like, I believe, 1,000 feet from any non-participating dwelling. Can you guys speak in terms to your guys's? You realize that's the biggest headache to say, or biggest noisemaker.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for us, we were setting back 200 feet to the fence line for any non-participating landowner whose property was under 5 acres. Since people have a primary farm, 80-acre tract ground, 10 acres, 20, it was really all over the board. So we wanted to look at kind of the single family primary home, and we found that that was around 5 acres. So we wanted to set back 200 feet to our fence line for that. So typically the way these projects are designed, the inverter is going to be located more centrally to the project anyway. So we would have 200 feet to the fence, then another 20 to 25 acres to the panel. And then within the array would be another 100 feet even more to the inverters. So the actual setback is would be just by virtue of how these are designed, close to 1,000 feet. Inverters themselves have a decibel rating that's similar to a window air conditioning unit. So you will not be able to hear an inverter at the property line, certainly at the fence line also in these projects. It would blend in background noise and ambient noise in the area very, very quickly. They're actually quite quiet. They're great neighbors, generally speaking, but the 200-foot setback was the previous requirement, just by virtue of how these projects are designed and how the setbacks to the fence line for Stewart Creek specifically was built out. It was going to create that natural buffer or increased buffer to the inverters.
So the way the bylaws are written, a minimum of 500 feet off the property line is great for us. And, you know, we can deal with more if needed. 500 seems sufficient. I've never seen a site design of this size with inverters any closer to any property line than 500 feet. So very comfortable with it as is, and would entertain higher stricter regulations if needed. But you know, in particular, if somebody's particularly worried about that near their residence, and they see the site design in the community meeting, we're happy to work with people as well to revise things if there's a particular.
I would see where it's possible that an inverter would be close to home is with a community solar project, since the point of interconnection is going to be on the existing distribution network or the electrical grid. The inverter might be located closer to the power lines themselves, which would be on the edge of the property. So for utility scale development, where you're constructing your own substation for POI or interconnecting with another substation, you're actually not going to be siting inverters close to the edges typically.
Yeah.
They're going to be located more centrally so that you have to run less wire underground to make collection.
So it does address noise in the ordinance. Noise levels must meet Illinois Pollution Control Board noise standards, 35 Illinois Administrative Code, Part 900. That the zoning administrator shall take appropriate enforcement actions as necessary to investigate, to stop any violation that is occurring, including but not limited to the applicants to take responsible steps to mitigate noise complaints. So there is noise challenges or information in the ordinance. So as far as your the inverter having to be 500 feet away, the biggest concern I think is the health and safety and the noise, and I think both are addressed in the ordinance.
And as Chris mentioned, the new vegetative screening will provide significantly more noise dampening. Again, the noise is going to dissipate naturally without the screening, but once you add a vegetative screen additionally, that is really going to knock out any noise that may have ever been present. So really, it's kind of a belt and suspenders approach for sure with respect to any noise ever from the facility.
As an ordinance for the future.
We had talked about 600. It was one of those conversations again, but we decided to come up with 500 feet. When you start doing 500 feet, you start looking at significant distance away. All this had already been discussed at previous renewable energies, and there's benefits doing farther away, but at the same time, when you start talking 2 football fields away, it's a heck of a long distance.
All of them. Under number 3.
What do you mean by dump sites? There where their garbage can? So you guys use lay down yards, don't you? At the site,
On site, yeah.
on site, that has to be included in your proposal even. Their lay down yard is going to be right there. This is for solar, the laydown is not nearly as great as windmills are. What does it say in regards to?
It's my understanding there are multiple laydown yards throughout the project. Just small on,
So is there a reason not to ask them to specify?
Well, it's where they're gonna put them within the project.
Yeah.
It's, so if I'm gonna be working in this area, I'm gonna lay it down in this area and I'm gonna go, it's the shortest distance, I think, of whatever they decide to be like, this is where we're gonna dump it today. I don't think we need to, as long as it's within the fenced in area of a laydown yard, it's not like we're bringing in windmill.
These are temporary construction sites and like I say, if,
That are located within the project.
right.
I've seen on occasion, lay down areas for small projects. So what we're talking about is for a large project. For small projects, I've seen the lay down area be adjacent to the fence site area. And the way that's usually handled is through a temporary easement for the time of construction. And so I think it does make sense to have those, if you care to see, have those identified. And, you know, if you want to see that, that's fine. It's not always exactly within the fence line. Sometimes it is adjacent to the fence line. Through, again, handled through a temporary easement with whatever landowner is the landowner at that particular location.
I think the laydown yard specified, location of the laydown yard specified in project area.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've got no problem with that.
do you want it just inside the project area? Because what he's saying is it could be just
It doesn't
outside.
have to be. They just have to define where it's at. I think the plan for the SES in, you can add a letter to it. Planned location for laydown yard and material storage. Would that fit?
That works for
Okay, if
us.
it's not within the project area, then they have to get a special permit for the laydown yard.
Well, they just have to disclose it in their permit.
The parcel that the laydown yard would be on would have to be a part of their petition.
Okay, so then it is within the project.
Well, it may not be in the fenced area, like windmills. We may take 10 acres over here and put in 3 feet of gravel, so we get a place to pull semis and stage. And from there, you take the materials and put a windmill up 2 miles away. I'm assuming the big projects, you wouldn't necessarily have it right inside the fence.
Not always right inside the fence. Often it would be block by block. You know, you might have a lay down as you've got your driveway built out to an interior portion of the site. You have a lay down area on that interior portion of the site, construct it, and then you move to the next area.
Put a staging area for materials to come in, so you never have to put them together.
That's right. You know, and they carry the panels by hand. They're installed, crews and carry them by hand. So you want to have these within a reasonable walking distance of your lay down area to where you can actually install it.
I guess my concern is within the project area or inside the fence, is there a difference there?
Well, yeah, within project area and inside the fence, I guess it could feel like splitting hairs. All that I would want to say, because I've seen projects where, you know, it's tight in terms of where we're able to actually put panels. And so, and these are usually for small projects, 20 acres or less. There's not enough space to do the laydown area and the construction at the same time. So you have to do the laydown area at the side of where the site area is. I mean, so that's right outside the fence. It's right outside the formal where the project will always be. And it goes back, you know, it's an acre that gets used as a laydown area adjacent to the site and then is done away with afterward.
So ultimately, what are you trying to solve with understanding where the laydown yard is?
Understand
That's,
where it is, if it is in the footprint, maybe that's the word I want, of the proposed project.
but
Maybe
what are we,
footprint on fenced area and. I don't know.
but what are you trying to solve with knowing where the
I
laydown,
just
like,
want to know where it's at.
In their proposal to the zoning board, they should have it designated where they want their laydown yards.
I don't see it in here, but it should be.
you see how that can be added?
Yes,
Okay.
I agree. It does
Okay.
not hurt to know where what they're
Okay, so that'll
proposing.
get added to where the
I think that the county would need to keep in mind that that's probably subject to change, so we can incorporate language that we already have-
what's planned. It's
we
not
are-
what-
already have language in here that covers any changes made prior to the issuance of a building permit have to
That's
be.
fine. So if you can add that in, that'd be great.
I think it would look like the road delivery plan or the materials delivery plan that we also submitted. We did put in the perspective laid out here because that delivery plan should be going to those laid out yards.
Right. Yeah.
But really the construction of these utility scale projects is very similar to a collection. Scott mentioned you don't want to strap the panels in some back and have them walk a mile. You're going to have it relatively close to where you're working. Shift around and it'll be removed.
We have her speak into the mic, please.
Can you just grab that mic?
On page 11, under consulting fund, part C, about halfway down, it says for the duration of the project from conception to completion. I would like to have that completion defined more. Is it completion of the construction or completion of the total 35-year span?
The completion is the completion of. We had talked about, completion is completion of the actual.
You know, I don't know on this section. This was created by Dave Anderson, and I can communicate with him to find out what his intention is.
But I think it probably needs to be completion of the entire project, would you say, from
You know what?
construction to decommissioning?
Decommissioning would be a clearer word. that
So-
needs to be-
And you guys, as an industry, would be.
That's fine. Yeah.
It's,
Conception.
I mean, we prefer through just the permitting process because then we'll put the decommissioning bond in place. That would make more sense, but.
that's true,
it's
because
not-
they've got money in place for decommissioning and with what we've talked about, third-party engineering, decommissioning costs related to that. So it'd be conception to operation.
Or through construction, if you wanted to say. Construction and approval of construction.
Well, once you flip the switch.
Commercial operations date is what it's,
Yeah.
what you could use if you wanted to use the formal term.
It's a
Commercial operation.
operations date for COD is typically what we see. COD. COD is the very common acronym that's utilized to say that the project is no longer under construction. It's energized and operational, putting power onto the grid.
Because once it's running, now their monies become decommissioning funds.
Once
And
it's
there's
running, but then we
diff-
still want you to have that money on hand while you're reviewing the final, site walks
Right.
and building inspection.
Yep.
So that money's on hand. So commercial operations date, COD, would be the best point for that.
That work for you guys? Board?
Yeah, it kind of goes, the very last sentence in it then also refers to the completion of the project. Talking about completion, and completion is.
Completion of when it turns back on or turns on.
So that needs to say also.
Just-
I just want to know what completion meant.
Yep.
Good point.
Okay.
So it's listed twice in that paragraph.
Next one.
On page 13, number 14,
Says 36.
that the county board may extend this 3-year period. I was wondering how many times could it be extended?
As many as the county board sees fit. There's been a,
Well, I don't know if that would be appropriate, given the amount of changes that occur with the technology and renewables in general. I think at some point we're gonna have to do a rehearing because I would imagine things regarding the project would change so much after 6 years, 9 years.
If I may, real quick, it would depend on if you were using like kind materials or not. I think that would be a case by case decision to be made at the time that you apply for the extension. I mean, if it materially changes your project, then absolutely you should have to come back before the zoning board of appeals and reapply. But if it's substantially similar components, I think there shouldn't be a deadline on how many times you can come to the board for to request an extension. It doesn't mean that your extension request is going to be granted.
Yes, I think
So my concern with that, though, is how would we know whether the materials have substantially changed without a hearing?
you don't.
One
think-
of the zoning board members recommended sending it back to zoning at that time for a hearing. I don't know if that's an option that should be considered.
Mr. Pratt,
Um,
question.
But I feel like some more maybe formalized hearing should take place, whether before the zoning board or the county board, so that we are comfortable in knowing that things haven't substantially changed.
Isn't there an annual reporting requirement to the zoning administrator, though?
Yes,
In
So
this
would
new ordinance.
Care of in that, with that reporting requirement is to supply the zoning administrator with any new changes and let that, because generally how it, I'm just working my way through it, but like the zoning administrator makes a determination whether or not it would substantially or materially alter the project. That triggers, the party's right to appeal that determination. If they agreed with the determination and D or whoever the administrator was at that time says, nope, this changes the project significantly, you're gonna have to go back to zoning, then at least we have a formal determination in that appeals process.
we typically don't receive the annual reports until after the commercial operation date has been established. So this issue deals with prior to the construction. That would be after the project is up and running.
So is it possible to carve out still that annual reporting deadline between when the special use permit is issued and when the commercial operation date begins?
I would be in favor of that. That would allow us to know what is going on in this.
But
in the
right now,
meantime.
like, they haven't even pulled their special use permit, yet they're coming up on 36 months.
So, and a big part of this, has to do with us dealing with exogenous factors, primarily the grid interconnect and the grid manager. And for us, we're not trying to string anybody along. We want to get this done as quickly as possible, and whatever we can do to demonstrate good faith that we are working on that is great. As much flexibility as we can have, because the grid has just kind of gone crazy lately, is very helpful. So that's our position, is to try to maintain as much flexibility to show that in continued good faith development efforts without substantially changing anything that was agreed to in the original plan, but based on exogenous factors, we need some flexibility to be able to extend this out to continue financing it. And so the way it's written works pretty well for us, because it gives us freedom to come up to the board and say, hey, we're still working on this. Here's what we've done. If you guys want an annual, kind of an annual summary of what we're doing, and we're happy to provide that in exchange. If there can be kind of I don't know if you can write it in, but some sort of good faith acknowledgement that as long as parties are proceeding in good faith, that permit, well, I don't know exactly how you write it, but our goal is just to make sure that your goal is that we're not stringing you along to just stupidly extend a permit for a worthless project, and taking up county resources. Our goal is to make sure that while we're still investing in this, we have comfort around being able to invest in it. And so some sort of statement of an annual report continuing to demonstrate good faith efforts to move projects forward shall be supplied in order to inform the board of efforts, and the board, pending their review, shall agree to extend the permit. Something like that would work for us.
And I think from our place too, part of what we were working through is when we first applied, we were through the PJM interconnection process. We were going through, and we completed the feasibility study at that time to understand whether the project had a path forward with the grid operator. They had stated tariff timelines that they are not necessarily beholden to, and so they've just continued to extend that back out. We expected our final agreement to be tendered to us in November of last year. We're now in July, and they're estimating that should get a retool for that in December of this year. So they're continuing to drag us along. So being able to demonstrate that to the county, and demonstrate an active interconnection position is something that we can very easily do, and something that if a project does not have an active interconnection position and they're asking for that extension, that would show that it is a different project essentially at that point. So demonstrating that they are continuing to be plugged into the queue process and that they have not terminated or withdrawn that position could be another one of those reporting mechanisms that the county could utilize to show that the project is going forward. They're just stuck waiting for a third party that, I mean, as we're all aware, trying to get a utility quickly is not something that's done. And so they march the beer around. So trying to get faster is more difficult. So that's some of the flexibility we like to have with things that are wholly outside of our control. And we're originally operating for what they told us, but sometimes they just don't keep to that state timeline they have.
So a reporting requirement that requires us to explain where we're at, why we are where we're at, and what we anticipate at that point in time is something easy for us to provide. You know, we can just send a memo with that kind of info over, and then that can go to the board and they can decide.
And it did seem that section of the ordinance was written that way, that we did have to provide good reason to the county board. For
Correct.
that extension. If we just said, maybe we really like, it'd be nice. There's no requirement for the county. Trying to get this interconnection to maintain our original interconnection positions. Meeting. That is something that we can see as good reason for an extension being requested.
So why not just change it? It says the county board may extend this 3-year period for such time as it shall determine for good cause without further hearing. Just change it to with further hearing before either the zoning board of appeals or the county board.
Well, if they're going to be providing updates,
But providing the update before the zoning board or the county board is not the worst ever. We can still extend it.
It's gonna be up to the county board.
It'll be up to the county board to still extend it, but it takes it off of your plate. They have to go before the zoning board. It's not a reopening of the whole thing. Say, this is where we're at. This is the reason PJM.
and then
So-
zoning board would make a recommendation to the county board as to whether or not
They-
extend the permit.
Correct. And all you have to do there is change without to with further hearing.
We'll have to add a little bit more detail to make sure that process is clear.
But I think
But
that's,
yes,
I think that's fair enough to ask that they come before, because that shouldn't be a 5-meeting zoning hearing. It should be a
right.
45-minute update in reality, because we're not
Essentially.
rehashing the whole thing. We're rehashing, have you made any progress? And why are the 36 months?
Quick submit to the zoning board and unless you don't find major changes.
Yep.
Prior to the issuance of building permits, I think that the zoning office should have, or should receive quarterly reports, as opposed to just one annual report. That way we can kind of keep on track and see what's going on.
If your office thinks you can handle quarterly reports, then have quarterly reports.
Okay,
That works for you guys?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If we're just doing quarterly reports to check the box and nobody's ever gonna look at them, then. what's not-
no, those reports will come into play if they need an extension. That's the thing. Then we have,
That's fine.
Yep, gives you the opportunity to see what's going on.
right.
You have to-
And especially with these PJM delays, it will be helpful to us to kind of know what's going on and to make sure that they're still working towards getting that agreement.
Okay.
So you don't want to set,
I mean, we'll do whatever is needed. Quarterly reports we have limited time in what we can do on other projects. So that's not onerous, but it's getting towards a little extra work. Maybe biannual would be a little easier for us to handle. We can do quarterly if that's what's required, but
I was thinking biannual, like
Okay.
things, it's industry, things don't move fast.
okay, and I'm not, I guess, envisioning anything too in-depth
Yeah, I mean,
As
we
far
can send
as
a
re-
letter to say we're continuing to work with PJM and anticipate an update. No notable material changes have been made to the site plan. We can send that. If you don't mind, because, and we have tracking software, but if we somehow forget, we don't want that to be something that like, oh, you forgot your quarterly report, your permit's invalid, something like that. But we're happy to provide updates as needed. And, we're here for all these meetings, so I'm happy to continue providing whatever update is necessary.
When you get your updates from PJM, are those things that you can provide to the county so that,
They only come every 12 to 18 months. That was the problem. They're not
Okay.
regular. They're not a regular.
So
update.
even once a year is still, I think we're asking everybody to do extra work, that we're just gonna say there has been no changes at every quarter. I think once a year, we've seen how slow PJM moves, and we definitely know how slow county government moves, that there might be very few changes in a 12-month period. I think quarterly would just get,
Certainly hope there will be changes in the 12-month period.
we do too, but we've realized that there isn't.
Yeah, right.
And,
Right.
and it's entirely straightforward for us to be able to show and demonstrate that the project is still active. Because part of what we're doing right now is we're trying to get updates from them. And since we've been here, it's been a couple of months of meetings that we've been attending with you all. We're still leaning on them and haven't gotten a formal response from them. So, faster than they are, but we certainly demonstrate to you all that it is active in that space, and also some of the other environmental studies that we've been doing. Interconnection is not the only, specifically is the delaying factor right now, but there could be for other projects that may exist that make them the environmental delays that people see. Supply chain issues. So there's endangered species that needs remediation efforts, extra remediation efforts, or something comes up in the environmental site assessment that needs to be dealt with. And it takes a much longer period of time, so long as the developer demonstrates to the county, this is why we're realizing this delay, and it's for a good reason. So if they show a consultant contract that says it's taking 12 months to work through this process of having studied, that I think is also something that could be important, because delays come up for a multitude of reasons. Interconnection is going to be common across the board, but there are some that come up. There are projects where they try and get constructed. There are animals that just continue to burrow into the site even after they've been remediated, and they just keep coming back, and that can lead to additional delays for the project. So I think those reporting or certainly demonstrating is important, and it could be expounded upon in what's written, but I think what also is written currently does done this on development to demonstrate that they are indeed pushing the project forward, and there are causes for that delay.
As it's written, works well for us.
So we're gonna add it that they have to appear before the hearing, the zoning board. We'll update that section.
okay. So,
At request from the zoning administration or zoning administrator providing an update on the project, I think is also okay. So not even just a quarterly or annually, but
okay,
at request, I think is fair.
At request of the zoning administrator and the 36-month.
and really with these reports, I think our prime concern would be what's the delay? So
We just want communication. That's all we've asked
Right.
for all along.
do you want to specify what should be in those reports or just leave
I think
it?
it's just communication is the biggest thing.
What's your thought?
I
Who's gonna use this? Is there something you'd like to see?
guess my concern is what is the holdup? So I want to know what the delay is, the status of the delay, and then any plans, how you plan to get past that delay, I guess. Or what are you doing to get past that delay? I think would be the primary things that I'd want to see in the report if we're waiting.
Our
So,
goal should have this be what works for you. So
So that sounds like what you need.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
If you want to just do that by request and say, here's.
Yeah, that's
what we're
fine.
asking, Can you please provide an update on
Okay.
current timeline?
And we're all good with that.
We're good with that too. That's easier, much easier for us to have it as requested. 'Cause then-
Well, there's no deadline to it. She can get it when she wants it. As far as other companies, they refuse to do it, then
Then you know you're dealing with the.
somewhere
the
we're at,
fish or
6 months and stuff, no.
Yeah, right.
You guys are a great sounding board, we appreciate what you're doing, but there's gonna be other people coming here that are.
No, and I think that works nicely, that as requested, if they don't reply, you know, have a.
Status of the project presumably would be terminated.
Correct.
Right.
Next concern?
I'm done.
That's it? Okay,
Mr. Pratt sent in a thing of concerns. We just took care of the one.
yep.
Some of them look like they're in the screening process, different using screenings or landscaping.
Whoa.
So his first comment about the third-party engineer, I believe in the definition, it specifies that the third-party engineer would be paid for by the developer.
That was mentioned. I can't find it.
What was that?
I can't find it in here, but is that what's in the ordinance? He didn't specify exactly where that's at.
Professional engineer is a qualified engineer. What was the question, I guess?
He pays for
Oh,
the
Who pays for them?
So number 4, under definition section at the very beginning, a licensed professional engineer, and I would like to change that to a licensed Illinois professional engineer who was selected by the county and paid for by the applicant to perform reviews and inspections of applicable project plans and sites.
so it literally says it. Okay, so that's one.
Then he has 2 under screening, landscaping.
So. I'm not sure I understand this question, but the purpose of this section is to give the non-participating landowners an opportunity to have a screening on this project or for their property. Those willing to participate have 2 options. They can either have a screen installed or take a cash payment equivalent to what it would cost to have a screen installed for their property. The other option is to not participate or not to select an option, and a screen will automatically be installed. Wait, I misread
No.
that.
If they do not make an option, they get the one-time payment.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
His question was, should only have 2 options discussed above that paragraph.
There are only 2. You've got number 1 and number 2.
So if you're a non-participating landowner and you have the right to choose whether you want a payment or you want the screen installed. If you're a non-participating landowner and is just like, to heck with them, I want nothing to do with this, they will automatically receive a cash payment or equivalent to what a screen would cost to be installed.
This was one question that we had.
They need to make a decision.
Who does?
Seems that they only have it 2 options.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, but so the 2 options are here, and then if they don't select, so that's kind of giving you a 3rd option
No,
of
if,
not selecting.
yeah, if you don't select, then we select for you.
Yeah, it's essentially, it's a default.
Yeah, the default is that you're getting.
We don't want the company getting hung up because someone won't pick.
That was
And-
the whole thing, that if you've got somebody who's just a butter
Well,
who says, I don't want to,
I don't know the basis of his question,
Yeah,
but
it's-
yeah,
And that was one question we had.
just trying to touch it.
The way this is written, I think works well for us. The only question that we also had, actually, one of the three that we wanted to raise was it below says that a memorandum of understanding needs to be provided as proof of whatever option was signed. But if there's a landowner who's unwilling to sign a memorandum of option,
then it goes to the one-time payment.
then it goes to the one-time payment. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that works well for us.
Once again, our biggest problem is how many people who are non-participating who just don't want to discuss with you.
Right.
That was, we want them to discuss with you. You
Right,
want to be
right.
good neighbors. We want them to be good neighbors. But if there are people out there who say, I'm going to cut off my nose to spite my face,
Right.
if that's the case, we have to make a decision for you. And that's what section II says.
Yeah, and that.
There's
works
actually
very
three
well for
options.
us.
Well, yeah,
There's
you,
more,
you
yeah.
make a decision, you make no decision,
Or we make this.
or we make the decision for you.
And you get cash in hand for
Yeah.
that.
So that's that landscaping. We talked about this at length when it came to it. This is in regards to how tall the plants need to be, so on and so forth. What we wanted, and I've seen this happening right now on a project that I farm next to. The shrubs have already died. And who's responsible for that? That's the reason for saying, hey, you're gonna plant. Gotta find the. It wasn't in hires.
Or Roundup.
It wasn't me. Not me. So that was the reason for saying there's a minimum, because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to get it to the height that's required. And we addressed number 14.
Back to the landscaping. I have a question.
I have
Does
the answer.
this section refer to landscaping for non-participants? Or is this
Oh.
referring to the landscaping under the panels?
Landscaping under the panels. It has nothing to do with participating. It's page 10. I think it's industry is going to be very good with that. They want native grasses, flowers, plants that provide wildlife and pollinator habitat, include.
What?
They want to protect
It
erosion.
does say shall incorporate these. It doesn't say it shall consist only of these. Just it's giving them the ability to,
To do what's best.
right, but while still incorporating what's native to Illinois.
Yep.
This question seemed to be 3G though on it.
3G is page 10.
That
Yeah.
page there.
It's landscaping is actually letter G under section 3.
Does anybody else have anything in regards to wind other than, or excuse me, solar, other than the hearing process of the extension that has to be updated, or any of the conversation that we had that Alice needs to update?
We just had a couple other things real quick that I
No.
think should be pretty quick and clarifying. Page 13, G2B. About not the extension period, which we already discussed, but it talks about any physical modification to the SES that increases the number of solar conversion devices or structures and or land area occupied by the SES shall require a new special use permit. At what point is that active? Is that after initial special use permit, or is that after building permit? I think this is within the operations and maintenance period. The only reason I ask is because often after a special use permit, that's when we go and start trying to actually find materials to buy that we're going to build, and different panels have slightly different sizes. And so that's going to slightly alter the way that the exact panel layout is going to fit. Now, the fence line and the general layout within the property is going to be the same. So for us, it would make sense to have this be applicable after the building permit has been issued, because the building permit is what's getting built. Special use permit is the general idea of how this works and where it's going to be in all of its layout plans. So we'd just like to clarify our understanding there.
Where is this? I'm not,
Page 14.
I have it on 13, but 14, 13. It's G operational standard conditions. And then number 2, no, it's not 2B, it's just G 1B, I suppose. Yeah.
Middle of page 14.
Yeah, any physical modifications to SES, increases the number of
found
solar.
it.
That makes perfect sense after the site has its building permit and is built, because we can't go in and completely revise it. But until we actually get that building permit, we're always kind of readjusting where those inverters go, for example, or exactly as long as they're within the confines of what was approved within the special use
Well, the
permit.
whole purpose is that when you do your hearing is that you tell us what you're gonna use, and this is what we're gonna go through here next week. You tell us what you're gonna use, you're gonna tell us where it's going. Otherwise, it feels like it's a rushed plan.
Otherwise, what?
Otherwise, it feels like it's a rushed plan.
Yeah.
So I get where you're coming from, that you want to be able to change it to some level.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that can be in discussion with the zoning administrator.
Right.
But I think for the purpose of this, it has to be, if this is what you presented to the zoning board, this is what's approved from the county board, this is what the plan really needs to be. If there's substantial changes, it may require an update from the county board or from the zoning board, or it may be, hey, we were going to use square head nail or screws and now we're going to use Phillips. I don't think anybody in the whole county cares, but you tell the zoning administrator,
Yeah.
she's like, oh, yep, we're good.
Yeah, I think our main concerns are, if you present a report at hearing based on specific equipment, and then you get to building permit and all of a sudden it's not the same equipment, and all the reports that you presented at the hearing mean nothing. So it's that we want to make sure that what we are having a hearing on is what we're going forward on.
Yeah, because sometimes it's like, okay, we found First Solar might be the manufacturer that we're looking at using panels with, but then First Solar's all dried up. And so then what we can use is Trina solar panels. So all of them are tier 1, but by switching that one panel to a different panel, does that reopen the whole special use permit? Because that's what I'm reading here, that we have to go back to get that completely revised. Which that seems somewhat onerous in terms of the back and forth there. Now, if it's building permit, we're ready to break ground. We're ready to put these panels in the ground. Any revision to the building permit makes perfect sense that we'd have to go back and completely redo. In terms of fence line, that's going to stay the same. So we can say even the fence line and site area has to remain exactly the same. But
it says right there, like for
Right.
like replacements of SES components, including but not limited to solar panels, transformers, inverters, batteries, cabling, shall not require recertification, provided replacement is done in the equivalent fashion to the original installation and the required replacement. So no, you wouldn't.
got that. That works.
Yeah,
What about,
you're good.
so depending on the type of panel that we end up using, because one might be 3 foot, 3.5 feet by 6.5 feet versus 3 feet by 6 feet. And with that ends up, instead of having 20 rows in a certain area, that makes it 19 rows in a certain area.
I think that
So-
leaves it up to the zoning administrator if it's a big enough change that needs it to be necessary.
Okay.
But what we're really talking about is if you're saying, hey, we're only going to rotate east and west, and now all of a sudden we are going to put them 2 foot higher and they're going to rotate 360. I'm guessing they're going to be like, no. But if all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm using supplier A is what we planned, and now supplier B, it's the exact same thing, but they're 6 inches bigger or they're 2 foot bigger.
Right.
Like, as long as the process is the same, then
That's what we wanted to
we're
understand.
okay. So you're good.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the thing, there is going to be some discretion, of the zoning office to make that determination. But
Right.
that's the thing that we understand the equipment
Would you
and the
be
supply
willing-
chain issues and everything. So we're not worried about that. But if you change your array and now it falls on a property that wasn't a part of a petition.
Exactly.
You know, that's the thing that we're gonna be most concerned of is what have you presented at hearing that you've already testified to? What are you changing and is it consistent with what was already approved at hearing?
Totally agree. Would you be willing to put in language that says any material, like instead of physical material modification at the discretion of the zoning office? Because then that would let us kind of know exactly what we just said.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Because then clearly, like, we're not gonna change anything and then be like, oh, here it is, you already approved it. But what we might do is say, hey, this panel is 4x8 or 4x7 instead of 6x3. Does that, and here's what that's gonna mean the site's gonna look like afterwards. It's still in the same areas, all the stormwater is all the same, everything we testified is conceptually the same, but is that a big problem? If you say, no, not a big problem, but if we also say, well, we're gonna cut out all of these areas and we're gonna change this and make these, 12 feet high, is that material? Yes, of course, that's material. So as long as we could kind of codify that and say material modification at the discretion of the zoning office, that would be helpful for us.
Okay, done.
As we get to later stage, so again, for Stewart Creek, we had full title done already
Right.
now. 1 foot topos flown instead of 2 foot topo maps that were required. We had more specific one, which those late stage items aren't cheap. Full wetland delineation on the site, archaeological and architectural surveys are being done. For wetlands, there are you just have to get jurisdictional determinations now from the Army Corps. And if something's jurisdictional that originally wasn't flagged as jurisdictional like that on the delineation, now we have to set back from that area. So it won't be a material change, nothing's going to be modified, but if there are wetlands that now we have to set back from, that's just.
And to not have to reopen the whole special use permit because there's wetlands that we have to set back from. That's just what we wanted to understand how this was worded. Yeah.
You're
No,
good.
if they gave you restrictions and now you came to us and said, no, this restrictions no longer apply, we would be wondering about that. But I mean, they're saying you didn't have one and now you do. So
Right,
I don't see a problem with
Okay.
that. So.
As long as, if we could say material modification at the discretion of the zoning office, that would answer the question for us.
Okay.
And our last one was, and this isn't necessarily a big deal, but the 50K per megawatt is for the decommissioning on page 15, I.1. 50,000 per megawatt is higher than I've seen in most other places. So you guys, congrats on being very progressive there. It's about 5 times higher than what was previously proposed. And I wondered if we could just hear a little bit about it and if there's any room for third-party engineers to provide kind of usually what I've seen is, more in line with what the 10K was previously. Is there any wiggle room here just to add?
I think this should probably follow what the solar or what the wind says,
Yeah.
where it's third-party engineer, you guys pay for the third-party engineer. 125% of that,
Yep.
reviewed every 5 years.
Okay.
So
So-
That works for us. Because it's in the text, it's in a large block of text, actually. Yeah, first paragraph on page 15. The issuance of a building permit for any SES shall be made contingent upon the applicant's prior filing, a proof of its fulfillment of decommissioning security obligation for the entire site, and in no instance shall the financial security be less than $50,000 per megawatt, which that seems, I'm all about having a floor because you don't want some engineer saying $5 per megawatt. Like I get that, but this 50,000 is going to be a lot higher than what a third-party engineer is going to say. So it feels like there's a bit of a.
No, as long as you, and this worked for solar or for wind, excuse me, that as long as you're willing to eat the cost of that, then by all means,
Yeah, we'll definitely have a third-party engineer.
we
put
can,
that-
we can copy a lot of that over.
It's a third party engineer that we have also approved.
Correct.
Right.
And essentially what we want is this language to line up with what we've proposed in pipeline and what we have proposed in wind. The $50,000, again, is a protection for the county.
Right.
What are you guys still want to have a floor?
We didn't put a floor in solar, or we didn't put a floor in wind. I don't think you need to put a floor in personally. I think the third-party engineer, if they're worth their salt, they should have a realistic number.
And we're happy to have it be a county approved engineer or an engineer that the county
Yeah.
signs off on. We have
So-
to agree on what that number is.
I think just copy over what we have for decommissioning from solar, from wind
Wind.
to solar as far as decommissioning, and I'm very comfortable with that at
Okay,
125.
so
Also
in-
provide that for a decommissioning security.
What's that?
The AMA would also provide for.
Correct.
So in the next paragraph, it talks about 150% of the estimate. In wind, we're dealing with 125% of the cost estimate for financial security.
The difference is we didn't have a third-party engineer that was paid for by them. So now by them paying for the third-party engineer every 5 years, I don't believe that they need to go up to 150%. I believe that they can get by at 125, which is your inflation. 100% year one, 125 gets you to 5 years worth of inflation. We're not tying up,
2022.
unless it's 2022.
Yeah.
We're not tying up their credit line because they're willing to put the money up front for the third-party engineer. It's a give and a take, right?
Also, decommissioning solar is a lot easier than wind. It's-
Significantly. I would love to decommission a solar project. I'm just saying. I think that would be fun. Give me a backhoe and a bulldozer. Yep, let's go.
Out it comes.
But yes, I think we can copy a lot of that over with the 125%.
Okay. Never mind. I have a question for you, but I'll ask it
Great.
another time.
Hey,
Those are our only questions.
Mr. Bally?
No, I didn't see that, but that's a great one, just to transfer.
Yep, copy it over.
Decommissioning over and
Ms. Shippert? Mr. Kitson?
Good.
Somebody want to make a motion? Or what do you guys want to do?
move to send it to properties.
In a second? Yep, Mr. Kitson, Mr. Bally, Mr. Kitson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
All right.
Anybody opposed? Fantastic, moving along. And last but not least, wind. Wind, I think, was probably the easiest in the whole regards to the three that we had to look at.
Yeah, long term.
It's been here for a while. The biggest thing, thank you guys. Appreciate everything that you've helped us do. So wind has been really what it came down to was the ADLS, which is in there, and the decommissioning, which we updated at the last meeting. So unless anybody saw any changes to wind, please indicate it. Ms. Shippert, Mr. Kitson? Oh. Anthony, you good back there? Yeah. That's fine. Well, really what we have is until it goes to, once it goes to planning, we want it to be, when it goes to planning and they hear it, it's we don't want any changes coming from that. Ma'am, do you have any suggestions or comments in regards to wind? We're all good there? Courtney's gone.
I do have a question. At the last meeting, you guys discussed reducing the setback in exchange for, what did you guys?
The decommissioning.
The decommission.
Okay. I do have a concern about reducing the setbacks. These turbines are getting bigger, and I feel there are going to be concerns as to why the setbacks are getting shorter. And I don't know if we need to do anything to make sure adequate protections are being offered.
So a bigger windmill would actually give you a larger setback.
Should, yes.
Well, so if I've got a 500 foot at 3.1, or I've got a 600 foot at 3.0, I've actually got further from my house on a larger windmill.
Correct. But the thing is these are still large looming pieces of equipment. While it may not affect you, there are citizens that may not respond favorably to that. And I just want to make sure that we are doing what what is best?
So I think a lot of it came down to a give and a take with the decommissioning. For me, the biggest thing that I had was the ADLS. And knowing that's going to cost anywhere between $1 million and $2 million was very, very simple to give up 65 feet. Because we take 650-foot towers and the difference in 0.1 is 65 feet. That I hear, understand the industry. They say that they can reduce shadow flicker and sound by where they can put these projects.
And I would like to see proof of that.
I don't understand that. I'm going to take their word for it based off the fact that they've been very open and honest with me.
You know, if 65 feet isn't that much to us, it's not that much to them. So let's stick with 3.1.
Mr. Valley?
The other option would be maybe to consider a good neighbor policy, which we have implemented in previous projects.
So well, and I think they're going to have good neighbor policies anyways. So I open it up. Ms. Shippert says 3.1, Mr. Valley, 3.0 or 3.1?
65-foot tower, you're already 180,
No, it's 650-foot tower,
650.
It's
You're
65
already-
foot.
You're already at half a mile.
1950.
It's 65 feet, which seems insignificant to us, but to a landowner, that might be a big deal. So I just feel like we need to consider that.
And, you know, what's an industrial standard on that?
What are adjacent counties at? Do you have an idea? What's Bureau County at?
3.1,
Okay, Mr. Kitson?
ours
3.0,
matches.
3.1.
Well,
And they're all over the board
Right.
across. the
I think we
state.
have to do what we feel for Lee County. So
right. I guess the 3.1 is a little more, and you're leaning that way, right?
Maryland definitely is. I know.
I mean, that was my feeling last meeting.
Well, I mean,
3.1. Why give up? I mean, we're in the driver's seat here.
And they can always ask for a variance if they
Yeah.
need it or a good neighbor agreement.
And that's the thing is they can't obtain waivers if they want to reduce their setbacks.
Everything's for sale.
Essentially, and you know, there are some people that don't want these in their area and are not happy that they are living around them. And 65 feet would be a big deal to them, and that's all my concern is.
Mr. Valley?
It's so minimal to me. I can understand not wanting to live around these, but you want to, so. I don't care. I mean, is it something we have to use as a negotiating tool for?
No, we can do it however we want.
I mean, decommissioning, we already have in here, you know.
Which I think is fair, like per what it was before at,
Well, I think this is a great approach, yes. But I don't see why we need to do that.
I can go either way.
And that's the thing.
and
is-
I can go either way. So I've got two that can go either way and two that are, one that's very strong 3.1 and one that's convinced of 3.1. So
Yeah.
And that's the thing, if I could see some information that explains to me why this 65 feet is such a big deal to them. I'm not understanding how it could reduce shadow flicker. I'm not understanding how putting it closer to a home would reduce noise. I know it's only 65 feet, but I don't understand. So if I could understand it better from their perspective, maybe I wouldn't, 3.1 and 3.0 is not a big difference, but I just don't understand at this point.
Kind of my position is, I'm with Maryland. We've got it, why give it up? But I also I'm looking to Alice for some, you deal with it all the time. I mean, we're sitting here saying 65 feet's not a big deal. Well, how did you?
And that's the thing is to a landowner who doesn't want these in their neighborhood, it is a big deal. But I don't understand why it's a big deal for the industry. I guess I just need more information. At the last one, Chris had had said that he had met with Anthony and that he was told that it would reduce shadow flicker. Now, everything I've heard in the last 15 years testimony provided, putting a turbine closer to a resident would increase, not decrease. So that's where I'm having my trouble understanding why this 65 feet is so important to the industry and why are we.
Say that again, Anthony. Okay, so he'll get information. Let's put it at 3. Courtney, do you have something?
Courtney, do you have anything to weigh in on
I see you joined back with us.
And I think I missed part of the conversation, so I don't have anything at this time, but I'm happy to look into it.
Don't worry, I missed most of the conversation today too, so.
Thank you.
So what do we want to leave it at? 3.1 and wait for information to come back from,
Yeah, if we don't see a reason to change it, let's leave it where it's at.
Not broken, don't.
okay, so move it to 3.1 again and entertain a motion to send it to properties.
So move. Second.
Mr. Kitson, Mr. Bally. All those in favor of sending the wind ordinance to properties, signify with 3.1, with the appropriate changes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We did it. We got some stuff done. We just got battery storage, right? We'll deal with that when we'll get through this.
Now, when these leaf properties, is that when we'll send them to Charlie in?
I'm sorry?
These leaf properties, is that when we'll send them to Charlie before they get to the board?
Correct. Yes,
You
theoretically.
can send them anytime to Charlie, but.
Yes, I'm gonna work through and make sure that all the cleanup has been done. And then I will send them on to Charlie
But he'd
as,
like, you know, I
yep,
I
I,
understand him not wanting them before they're cleaned up. I mean,
yep. And,
The property's just gonna recommend to send them to,
Executive to the
Executive.
county board.
right,
so we
and
have that much
and
time
so-
to get through it.
really, we have some leeway to make minor changes up until the point where the county board decides to hold it over. At that point, no further changes can be made. So we still have a little bit of wiggle room between now and then to do any additional cleanup, clarification, things of that nature.
Just to clarify then, we're sending the property's gonna send it to executive. Executive sends it to the board, which then sends it to claims.
No, they
Then
send it to the planning commission
Planning,
for a public hearing.
right.
And
okay.
then the planning commission will send it back to the county board with the public's comments. And then the county board will move to hold it over for a month.
Then they'll have to hold it over, yeah, okay. So I'm just looking at how far. Okay, very good.
Approximately 3 months, so.
It's a lot of progress. You know, I thank you guys for all you've done here. My goodness. I've been gone or
We know.
things going on.
We know, I know.
Yeah. So you guys have
Um,
really stepped up. Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
so moved.
Mr. Kitson, Mr. Bally seconds. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
All right.
All right.
Anybody opposed? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will probably have a meeting in August to do for September for battery storage.
Yeah, I would like a little bit of time to kind of get these, make sure these are headed in the right direction, and then we'll direct our attention back to battery